I should have felt joy. It was my wedding day, after all. The flowers were perfect, soft white roses nestled in green eucalyptus. The air buzzed with warm laughter and clinking glasses. James looked at me like I was his entire world. And yet, there I sat, at the center of it all, utterly hollow. Behind every smile I forced, there was a whisper. Not from strangers, but from the people who raised me. My family, scattered across 3 round tables near the back, kept their voices low but their eyes loud. I heard them. I always heard them. Pathetic, my mother muttered, not realizing I had walked close enough to hear. Or maybe she did. Maybe she wanted me to hear. She should be grateful he even looked at her, my aunt whispered to someone beside her. They say she's doing creative work now, my cousin scoffed. What does that even mean? Freeloading? I stood behind the curtain of the floral arch, taking deep, quiet breaths before walking back to the reception. The lace on my dress suddenly felt suffocating. I pressed a hand to my stomach and told myself, this is your day. Let them talk. But I couldn't pretend anymore. They didn't think I had anything to offer. Not love. Not ambition. Not value. In their eyes, I was a failure clinging to a man too good for me. Someone to be pitied, not celebrated. And worst of all, I could see it in their faces, they were embarrassed for me. It wasn't the first time I felt like this in their presence, but I'd hoped, stupidly, maybe, that today would be different. That they'd see me for who I've become, not who they decided I was years ago. I glanced over at James, who was laughing with his father. He looked so at ease. So proud. And I knew in that moment, he didn't marry the version of me they believed in. He married the truth. The woman they refused to see. What they didn't know was that I wasn't just the girl they dismissed. I had a secret. One I'd kept buried for years. And if they thought today was the day they could humiliate me one last time, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. Growing up in my family felt less like being nurtured and more like being measured. From as early as I can remember, success wasn't something you defined for yourself, it was a fixed template you were expected to fit into. My parents worshipped titles: doctor, lawyer, engineer. Anything less was considered failure. Anything creative? Laughable. My older brother, Raj, was the golden child. Full ride to Stanford, then med school, and now a well-respected surgeon. My cousin Priya was a corporate lawyer by 25. My family treated them like royalty. Their birthdays were lavish. Their achievements were announced like national holidays. My name only came up when I was being used as a cautionary tale. And I wasn't lazy. I wasn't aimless. I was passionate, curious, and endlessly creative. I wrote short stories before I could ride a bike. I illustrated my own picture books and acted them out in front of my stuffed animals. In high school, I submitted a short film to a regional contest and won second place. I was over the moon. My parents barely looked up from their phones. That's nice, my mother said. But imagine what you could do if you focused on real skills. It was always like that. I could ace every English and history class, write the best essays, win quiet accolades from teachers, but none of it mattered. None of it counted. Creative fields are for people with trust funds, my father used to say. You want to be poor and miserable your whole life? By the time I was a teenager, I'd learned to keep my dreams secret. I buried my love for storytelling deep down and pretended to care about what they cared about. I declared a major in economics to keep them off my back. I smiled at the comparisons to Raj and Priya, even though each one sliced at me like paper cuts. Maybe you'll catch up one day, they'd say. I'd nod, pretending not to notice the sting. What hurt most wasn't the pressure, it was the conditional love. When I brought home an A in physics, my father gave me a rare, proud smile. When I told him I wanted to write a novel someday, he sighed and changed the subject. Their affection always had fine print. "You'll never amount to anything if you keep chasing childish dreams," my mother once told me during a family dinner. Everyone nodded along, including my cousins. I smiled through it. Bit the inside of my cheek until it bled. Eventually, I stopped trying to prove myself to them. Not because I gave up, but because I realized they were never really listening. No amount of achievement outside their mold would ever make me enough in their eyes. So I stopped performing. I got quiet. But I didn't quit. They thought I was a disappointment. A lost cause. The girl who would end up dependent on someone else's paycheck. But while they were busy scoffing at my silly dreams, I was planting seeds they'd never see coming. After college, reality hit harder than I expected. I had a degree I didn't care about and no clue how to climb a ladder I never wanted to be on. I took a corporate job because it paid the bills, but every day felt like I was slowly erasing parts of myself just to survive. I'd come home exhausted, not from the workload, but from the weight of pretending. Then the layoffs came. I was among the first to go. I tried freelancing. I worked retail. I picked up copywriting gigs, babysat for neighbors, and at one point even sold handmade art prints on Etsy. I scraped by, sometimes just barely. My apartment was small, the rent was high, and more than once, I skipped meals so I could cover utilities. That should have been the time my family rallied behind me. But they didn't. They used my struggle as proof that they had been right all along. At a cousin's engagement party, I showed up wearing a dress I'd borrowed from a friend. My father looked me over and said, "Still trying to chase those fairy tales, huh? Maybe you should write about this phase, for your memoirs when you hit rock bottom." Everyone laughed. I didn't. They loved reminding me of how far I'd fallen, especially in front of others. To them, I was a cautionary tale in heels. "At least Raj has a house," my mother said once while sipping wine. Some girls are just too proud to accept their reality. I stopped going to family events. Every gathering became a minefield. Every comment chipped away at my strength. My mental health spiraled. I started seeing a therapist, something I never dared to mention to them, because therapy, in their eyes, was just another excuse. Eventually, I cut them off. No dramatic announcement. Just silence. I blocked numbers, left messages unread, and let the distance speak for itself. It was the first time I chose peace over performance. For 2 years, I barely heard from them. And for the first time in my life, I started to feel free. I focused on healing, building, dreaming again. I started working on something real, something of my own. But when I announced my engagement to James, the silence cracked. Suddenly, they were everywhere again. Emails. Voicemails. "So happy for you. Let's catch up. When's the wedding?" Not because they missed me. Not because they had changed. But because they thought I had finally done something right. They didn't know that James didn't save me. He didn't rescue me from ruin. He simply saw me, valued me, at a time when I was learning to do the same for myself. And I had a feeling they were about to find out just how wrong they'd always been. I met James in the most unremarkable way, waiting in line at a bookstore cafe, both of us reaching for the same copy of The Prophet. I let him take it, but not before quoting a line from it that made him pause mid-smile. He laughed and asked me to coffee right there. He wasn't flashy or loud. He was warm. Present. When he asked questions, he actually listened to the answers. That alone felt revolutionary. At first, I kept my guard up. I was so used to being underestimated or reshaped to fit someone else's mold that I didn't know what it meant to just be. But James had this quiet way of disarming me, not by force, but by consistency. He never once asked what my backup plan was. When I told him I was writing again, he lit up like I'd told him I'd discovered a new planet. "That's incredible," he said. And he meant it. He always meant it. There was a night, maybe 6 years ago, I was sitting on the floor of my apartment, back against the heater, laptop balanced on a stack of unpaid bills. My job at the time had just laid me off. I had less than $300 to my name and a brain buzzing with stories no one cared to hear. I could have given up. God knows it would have been easier. But instead, I opened a blank document and started sketching an idea I'd held in my head since I was 15, a place where people like me, storytellers, illustrators, dreamers, could create and be seen without begging for scraps of attention on bloated social platforms. A place that didn't care about credentials or degrees or whether you had 10 followers or 10,000. I called it Kindred Pages. It started small. A website where users could publish serialized stories, collaborate with artists, and eventually earn donations or split ad-free subscriptions. I coded it myself using free tutorials and forums. Bought the cheapest domain plan available. Slept 5 hours a night and spent the rest glued to that glowing screen, building and rebuilding, teaching myself back-end development between writing support emails and drawing early icons. I published my own stories under the name Kin, a pseudonym I chose to protect myself from the judgment I was sure would come. And for a while, it went unnoticed. Crickets. I launched with 12 users, 3 of whom were friends I practically begged. I sent hundreds of cold emails to art collectives, indie publishers, creative forums. Most went unanswered. Some mocked the idea. It's cute, but not sustainable. Too soft for this market. I cried more nights than I cared to admit. But I didn't stop. Eventually, a single webcomic, hosted exclusively on Kindred Pages, went viral on Tumblr. That brought in thousands of new users. Suddenly, artists were collaborating across countries. Writers were pairing with animators. The platform took on a life of its own. I reinvested every cent I earned from freelancing into hosting fees, app development, legal help. I still used the name Kin, staying completely anonymous. I didn't want the noise. I didn't want attention. I just wanted to protect what I'd built. 3 years in, a mid-size publisher reached out with a partnership offer. A year after that, 2 early-stage investors made proposals, one of which I accepted. Quietly. Carefully. 6 months before James proposed, I sold 40% of Kindred Pages for $89 million. The NDA kept it out of the press, which was exactly what I wanted. I didn't need the headlines or the interviews. I still remember sitting alone in my apartment after the wire transfer went through. I stared at my bank account for almost an hour, then ordered takeout and went back to moderating a fanfiction thread. Because here's the thing no one tells you, success doesn't undo the damage. Money doesn't heal the wounds of being told, over and over, that your dreams are worthless. It doesn't fill the space where love should have been. And it definitely doesn't rewrite the voices that echo in your head when you think you're not enough. I kept my secret not because I was ashamed, but because I needed to be sure. Sure that the people around me didn't just see numbers or potential. That James didn't love me because I was successful, but because I was me. And my family? They didn't even know I had a platform, let alone a fortune. They still thought I was struggling to pay rent. Still whispered that I was a freeloader. That James was settling for someone without prospects. I could have corrected them 100 times. Could have flaunted my success. Could have made them eat their words. But I didn't. Because validation is not the same as love. And I had learned, sometimes the hardest way, that you can be admired and still feel invisible. But I was done feeling invisible. And on my wedding day, with my name etched in gold on the seating chart and their sneers echoing behind polite clinks of champagne, I realized something. If they needed proof of my worth, maybe it was finally time I gave them some. Weddings are supposed to be joyful. I kept telling myself that as I smiled for photos, greeted relatives I hadn't seen in years, and tried not to flinch every time someone gave me that look, the one that said, "Poor Maya." Still pretending, huh? It started early, as I moved from table to table, trying to be gracious. "You're lucky he's marrying you," my uncle chuckled, swirling his wine like it was wisdom. "Someone like James? Stable, successful. You really hit the jackpot, sweetheart." I gave a tight smile, said nothing. Then my aunt leaned in close, perfume thick in the air. "You must be so relieved. Someone finally willing to take care of you. It's every girl's dream, isn't it?" I laughed politely, but my stomach tightened. They didn't know. They chose not to know. They saw the elegant ceremony, the expensive florals, the kindness in James's eyes, and decided I had simply lucked into a life that didn't belong to me. It wasn't just them. It was all of them. The same people who had watched me grow up and dismissed me every step of the way were now toasting to my future like they had ever believed in it. I kept telling myself to breathe. Don't make a scene. It's your day. Rise above it. Then, just before dinner was served, I overheard it. I was walking past the garden courtyard on my way back from the powder room when I heard my mother's voice, low and clipped. "She means well, but let's be honest," she said to James's mother. "Maya's always been unstable. She latches on to people. It's a pattern. You'll see. She's always needed someone to take care of her." There was a pause. A delicate sip of tea. "She's a leech, if I'm being honest." That word. Leech. I didn't breathe. I stood still behind a hedge, staring at my bouquet like it belonged to someone else. A leech. That's what she thought I was. After everything. After the years of silence and struggle and growth. I walked away before I could break down. Back inside, James smiled at me from across the room, completely unaware of the storm gathering inside me. I went straight to the bridal suite and opened the drawer where I'd stashed a single sealed envelope, white, thick, clean. Addressed in my handwriting, to the couple who reminded me that kindness travels both ways. It was always a contingency plan. A just-in-case. I never thought I'd use it. But sometimes silence isn't noble. Sometimes it's just another way of staying small. And I was done staying small. I straightened my dress, touched up my lipstick, and walked back into that reception with the envelope in hand. They wanted proof. They were about to get it. The envelope felt heavier than paper should. Heavier than the years it carried. I walked to the head table, where both our families sat, my parents rigid and proper, James's kind and gently curious. I paused in front of my mother, heart steady but hands ice cold. She looked up with that familiar tilt of her head, the one that always preceded a quiet judgment. "For you," I said, placing the envelope on the white linen in front of her. "And Dad." She blinked, taken aback. "What is this?" I didn't answer. I just nodded for her to open it. She hesitated, sensing a shift. Then she peeled the flap open and drew out the papers inside. First, the redacted investor agreement, signatures visible, amounts and ownership terms clear enough to understand. Then the bank statement. 1 month old. Balances in the high 8 figures. Neatly formatted. My name printed at the top. $89 million. Her eyes didn't widen. They froze. Like her brain had jammed on the numbers, unable to compute. My father leaned over, read the paper, and sat back slowly like the wind had been knocked out of him. Murmurs stirred around us. I took a breath, not angry, not loud, just clear. You always measured my worth in money, I said. Every decision, every comparison, every insult was about what I didn't have. What I wasn't. My voice didn't shake. So here it is. I'm worth $89 million. Does that make me lovable now? Silence fell over the room like a dropped curtain. My aunt's fork hit her plate. A cousin gasped. James looked at me, proud, but calm. He knew. He'd always known. But the others? They looked at me like they were seeing a ghost. Or maybe, finally, a woman. I didn't tell you, I continued, because I wanted to know who loved me without a price tag. Who saw me as more than a disappointment. I turned to James's mother. Her expression was kind, understanding. And just so we're clear, I never needed anyone to take care of me. I just wanted someone who believed in me. James did. You didn't. My mother's mouth opened, but no words came. Her hand trembled slightly as she folded the papers back into the envelope. For years, I said, I let your silence define me. Your judgment. Your backhanded comments, your smug pity. I believed I was less. That I had to earn my worth by chasing the life you thought was successful. I scanned the faces around me, some stunned, some ashamed, some unable to meet my eyes. But I built something you never even asked about. Something that now supports thousands of creators around the world. And I did it while you told me I'd never be enough. I let that hang for a moment, then softened. I'm not here to humiliate you. This isn't revenge. It's clarity. I needed to say it out loud, for me. Because today is the day I stop carrying your disappointment like it belongs to me. And then I smiled. Not bitter. Just free. I'm done proving myself to people who never bothered to look. Then I walked back to James, who stood, waiting for me like he always had, with open arms, and no conditions. And I felt something lift. Not because of the money. But because for the first time in my life, I told the truth, and let it be enough. They reached out a few days after the wedding. A text from my father, we didn't know, Maya. If we had known. A voicemail from my mother, her voice unusually soft, we were trying to motivate you. We wanted the best for you. You misunderstood. But I hadn't misunderstood. For years, I'd lived under the weight of their motivation, which always sounded more like disappointment dressed in pride. Their love had come with strings, and barbs. And silence. I didn't respond right away. I needed space. I needed to be sure that I wasn't reacting out of hurt, but choosing out of truth. When I finally did reply, it was with one sentence. If I hadn't made a dime, I'd still deserve respect. Because that was the point. It was never about the money. It was about the way they spoke about me when they thought I couldn't hear. About the years they dismissed my passion as childish. About reducing love to a transaction of success. They didn't respond to that. But James's family? They didn't hesitate. That night after the reveal, his mother came over, wrapped me in a long, firm hug, and whispered, "You didn't need to prove anything. But I'm proud you spoke your truth." His father squeezed my shoulder, grinning, "Now I see where that fire comes from." His sister called me a legend, but not because of the money. Because I didn't fold. For the first time in my life, I felt held, not for what I could offer, but for who I was. It was strange, the way love could feel when it didn't have to be earned. James never asked me to cut ties, and I didn't slam any doors. But I made my choice quietly. I chose the people who saw me before the spotlight. The ones who clapped when there was no audience. The ones who understood that worth isn't proven, it's inherent. And in choosing them, I finally chose myself. The park is quiet today, just the way I like it. Late afternoon light breaks through the clouds in soft golden shafts, painting the grass in long, warm streaks. The breeze rustles the leaves, and a few float lazily to the ground, spiraling like they're in no rush to land. I sit beneath a large oak, its branches sheltering the bench I've claimed as mine for the afternoon. In my hands is a sealed envelope. It's addressed simply to the couple who reminded me that kindness travels both ways. It's for James's parents. I smile a little just looking at it. Inside is not money or a check or any grand gesture. Just a handwritten letter. A letter full of gratitude for the meals, the conversations, the unwavering support. For loving me with no disclaimers. For being the kind of family I never knew I needed. I think about how far I've come, and I still feel a bit stunned. Not by the wealth, though yes, the financial freedom has opened doors I never dreamed of, but by the peace that came with it. Not because I bought peace, but because I no longer had to beg for it. Wealth didn't change who I was. It just gave me permission to stop explaining myself to people who never listened. It gave me the power to walk away without fear. And to build something lasting, something that matters to others, without waiting for someone else to call it real. I used to believe that if I just succeeded hard enough, my parents would see me. That if I got it right, they'd finally love me in a way that didn't bruise. But I don't believe that anymore. Some people will never see you clearly, and that's not your failure. It's just their limitation. And some people, like James's family, will see you without needing proof. That's where I choose to live now. In the light of people who reflect back warmth instead of cold judgment. In the presence of kindness that expects nothing but gives everything. I press the envelope gently between my palms, take one more look at the name on the front, and smile. It's not about revenge. It never was. It's about finally, fully believing in your own worth even when others don't. Especially when they don't. Because sometimes, being called worthless is the best reminder to prove, to yourself, that you're anything but. And I did.